Welcome to the deep dive. And before we even begin today, I want to take just a brief moment to warmly welcome you and offer a divine blessing for your day and for your entire week. May you find profound peace, sharp clarity, and unexpected grace in whatever situations you are facing right now. We are so genuinely glad you have chosen to spend this time with us.
It really is a true privilege to share this space with you today. May this time be deeply enriching for you.
We have a brilliant mission lined up for this deep dive. We are plunging into some incredibly rich source material today, specifically the study notes from the Holman Study Bible, which we love for its rigorous historical context.
Paired with insights from the NAA.
Right, and for those who might not be familiar with that abbreviation, it stands for the Nova Almeida Atualizada. It is a highly respected Portuguese translation that combines really brilliant modern linguistic scholarship with a deep fidelity to the original texts.
It's the perfect convergence of sources, really. You get the hard archaeological and historical bedrock from Holman, and then the NAA really illuminates the poetic and theological nuances of the language used in this specific narrative.
Exactly. And our focus through both of these lenses is Genesis chapter 48. I want to frame the mission for you, the listener, right out of the gate. We are not just recounting ancient genealogy here. What we are looking at is an absolute masterclass in family dynamics.
Oh,
We
absolutely.
are going to explore surprising plot twists, deep generational tension, and this incredibly relatable theme of how our meticulously laid human plans so often get completely upended by a higher design.
Which makes it feel incredibly modern. I mean, we're dealing with a scenario involving rigid expectations, cultural traditions, and legal inheritance, all colliding with something entirely unpredictable.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have to set the scene. We are looking at an elderly, ailing Jacob, nearing the very end of his life in Egypt. He is on his deathbed, and he receives a final visit from his son Joseph, who brings along his own two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim.
The physical reality of this scene is just striking. The texts note that Jacob has to summon whatever physical strength he has left just to sit up in his bed to receive them. He is frail, but he is operating with this fierce, urgent determination.
He knows his time is short.
Right, he knows there is a massive legal and spiritual transaction that must take place before he is gone.
And the very first thing he does when he manages to sit up is recount a defining moment from his past. He talks about how God Almighty appeared to him at Luz in the land of Canaan, and he repeats the covenant promise.
The promise that God would make him fruitful, multiply his descendants, and give them the land as a perpetual possession.
Yes.
By invoking that specific vision at Luz, Jacob is laying the legal foundation for his next move. He isn't just reminiscing for the sake of nostalgia, he is officially acting in his capacity as the patriarch, securing the chain of custody for the covenant promise.
Which sets up a truly radical move. Jacob looks at his two grandsons, Ephraim and Manasseh boys, who were born and raised in Egypt, and he legally and familially shocks everyone in the room. He formally adopts them.
He does. He explicitly states that these two are his, just as his oldest sons, Reuben and Simeon, are his.
What's fascinating here is the underlying legal maneuver, which the study notes unpack beautifully. In the ancient Near East, adoption was a potent legal tool. It was often used to bypass traditional inheritance laws or to solidify political alliances.
Right, it wasn't just sentimental.
Exactly. By elevating Ephraim and Manasseh to the status of his own full sons, Jacob is functionally giving Joseph the double portion of the inheritance.
Let's drill into the mechanics of that double portion for a moment. Our audience knows the term, but the sheer scale of what Jacob is doing here is staggering.
It completely restructures the political future of the nation. The double portion was the undisputed legal right of the firstborn son. It meant you received twice as much land and wealth as any of your brothers.
Marking you as the undisputed leader of the family moving forward.
Yes. So by carving out two distinct tribal shares for Joseph's line one for Ephraim and one for Manasseh, Jacob is bypassing the biological birth order entirely. He is officially declaring Joseph the firstborn, which completely blows up the traditional hierarchy. Reuben was the actual firstborn, followed by Simeon. But the study notes draw direct attention to this demotion.
The Holman notes provide the critical context for why this shift happens. Reuben and Simeon didn't just lose their status on a whim, they forfeited it through their own actions.
They disqualified themselves.
Precisely. Reuben committed a grievous moral offense by sleeping with his father's concubine, Bilhah. And Simeon, along with Levi, orchestrated a brutally violent, unauthorized massacre in the city of Shechem.
Those actions demonstrated a profound lack of character.
The leadership blessing required someone who could shepherd the covenant, and the older brothers showed they couldn't be trusted with it.
So character ultimately superseded biology. Because of this legal adoption on a deathbed, Joseph's descendants will eventually inherit a massive 1/6 of the entire territory of Canaan. That's 2 tribes worth.
It's massive.
But amidst all this heavy geopolitical maneuvering, there is this sudden, deeply emotional pivot. Jacob pauses his declarations and remembers his wife Rachel. He recalls her tragic death on the road near Ephrath.
It creates such jarring but beautiful emotional whiplash. The study notes suggest that simply looking at Joseph and his sons brings the memory of Rachel flooding back into the room.
She was Joseph's mother.
The great love of Jacob's life. And her early death was an open wound he clearly carried for decades. Before he can execute the final legal blessing over her grandsons, he has to speak her name. He weaves his profound personal grief directly into the legal fabric of the nation's future.
It really grounds the entire narrative. You realize that beneath the ancient tribal politics, this is just a grieving husband looking at the faces of his grandchildren.
Yeah.
But as the scene progresses, we get a specific physical detail that sets up the major conflict of our deep dive today. Jacob's eyes are heavy and failing from old age. He is functionally blind.
The literary symmetry here is impossible to ignore. The study notes highlight this as a moment of poetic irony. Jacob's physical blindness mirrors the exact condition of his own father, Isaac, back in Genesis chapter 27.
The young man who once exploited a blind father to secure a blessing is now the blind father preparing to give one.
It is a stunning full-circle moment, yet the texts emphasize a crucial distinction here.
What's the distinction?
While his physical eyes are failing, God grants Jacob an incredibly sharp prophetic sight. He is looking at Joseph, a son he mourned as dead for over 20 years, and he is living to see Joseph's own seed.
He may not be able to make out their faces clearly, but his spiritual discernment is operating at its absolute peak.
Exactly.
Which brings us to the setup. Joseph, operating as the highly capable, organized vizier of Egypt, takes control of the room. He carefully and deliberately arranges his sons for the blessing. Think of it like a meticulous wedding planner arranging the seating chart for the most important VIPs.
He wants everything perfect.
He positions his firstborn, Manasseh, at Jacob's right hand, which is the position of primary blessing and power. He then places the younger son, Ephraim, at Jacob's left hand. He does the math, lines everything up perfectly, and waits for tradition to take its course.
It is the ultimate expression of human logic and order. Joseph is managing the situation to make it as smooth as possible for his elderly father, older on the right, younger on the left. The protocol is set.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Jacob reaches out his hands and deliberately crosses his arms.
Wow.
He places his right hand on the head of the younger brother, Ephraim, and his left hand on the head of the older brother, Manasseh.
It is a deliberate shattering of protocol. Both the Holman and NAA notes emphasize that this wasn't the clumsy fumbling of a dying man. The text explicitly states he did this knowingly with intentional prophetic discernment.
Joseph is immediately distressed by this. He actually tries to physically intervene. He grabs his father's hand, attempting to lift it off Ephraim's head and force it onto Manasseh, saying, "Not so, my father, for this one is the firstborn."
He assumes his father's blindness has caused a catastrophic mistake.
Right. He thinks it's an error.
Consider the dynamic in that room. You have Joseph, the second most powerful man in the known world, a man whose entire life in Egypt has been built on restoring order out of chaos. He is trying to force his father's hands back into the framework of biological tradition.
He cannot comprehend that the deviation is the plan.
Exactly.
But Jacob refuses to yield. He gently but firmly pushes back against his powerful son and says, "I know, my son, I know."
I know. It is such a quiet flex of spiritual authority. He's telling Joseph that physical sight has nothing to do with what is actually happening in the room.
Let's break down the specific language Jacob uses when he finally speaks the blessing over these boys. He invokes the God of his fathers, Abraham and Isaac, but the titles he uses for God are completely unique.
They represent a massive theological shift. The study notes pull out 2 specific, breathtaking descriptions. First, Jacob refers to God as the God who has been my shepherd all my life long to this day.
A shepherd.
The NAA notes point out that this is one of the earliest biblical uses of this metaphor. In the ancient Near Eastern context, deities were overwhelmingly depicted as fearsome warriors, storm gods, or distant, untouchable kings.
Right, power and distance.
But to call God a shepherd, the Hebrew word ra'ah, implies an intimate, down-in-the-dirt level of care. Sheep are vulnerable, and the terrain of Canaan was brutal. A shepherd guides, provides, and protects at great personal cost.
Jacob is reviewing a life marked by exile, deception, fear, and profound loss, and concluding that he was meticulously shepherded through all of it.
It reframes all of his past trauma.
And the second title he uses.
He calls God the angel who has delivered me from all evil, or the one who has redeemed me. The concept of the Redeemer, the Goel, was a legal term for a family member who buys back a relative from slavery or rescues them from ruin.
A very active rescue.
Yes. Jacob is acknowledging an active divine presence that constantly intervened to buy him back from the brink of destruction, often destruction caused by his own choices. This is the intensely personal covering he is now placing over Manasseh and Ephraim.
He then reveals the prophetic reason for the crossed hands. He tells Joseph that the older brother, Manasseh, will indeed become a great people. But the younger brother, Ephraim, will be greater, and his descendants will become a multitude of nations.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the historical accuracy of this deathbed prophecy is staggering. The notes trace how this played out over the subsequent centuries.
How does Ephraim eventually take the lead?
When the Israelites finally return to conquer the Promised Land, the man who leads them across the Jordan River is Joshua. Joshua is a direct descendant of Ephraim.
Oh, that makes perfect sense.
As the centuries roll on, the tribe of Ephraim grows so dominant that after the nation splits into two kingdoms, the entire northern kingdom is frequently referred to by the prophets simply as Ephraim. They became the undisputed powerhouse of the north.
The NAA notes introduce a very sobering caveat to that history, though. It wasn't an unconditional permanent reign.
Far from it. The notes reference passages like Psalm 78, which detail how God would eventually reject the tent of Joseph and bypass the tribe of Ephraim entirely.
When it came time to establish the eternal throne, God chose the tribe of Judah.
Yes, the line that would eventually produce King David. It serves as a brilliant reminder that divine election is dynamic. The status of being chosen for a task is never an excuse for entitlement.
It is a constant subversion of human expectations. Reuben is bypassed for Joseph, Manasseh is bypassed for Ephraim, and eventually Ephraim is bypassed for Judah. It completely dismantles any illusion that we can put God into a predictable traditional box.
The moment you think you understand the hierarchy, the hands are crossed again.
As the encounter draws to a close, Jacob offers one final gift to Joseph. He says, "Behold, I am about to die, but God will be with you and will bring you again to the land of your fathers." He is prophesying the Exodus long before the oppression in Egypt even begins.
It's incredible foresight.
But then he gives Joseph one extra, highly specific piece of inheritance.
He grants him an extra mountain slope or ridge, setting him above his brothers. But the language he uses to describe how he acquired this land is fascinating.
He claims he took this land from the Amorites with his sword and his bow.
Which creates a wonderful historical puzzle that the study notes debate. Up to this point in Genesis, Jacob is depicted as a man of negotiation, wealth accumulation, and sometimes fleeing from conflict. We have no clear, explicit record of him leading a military conquest with a sword and bow against the Amorites.
So what are the study notes suggesting?
There are a couple of strong theories. It could refer to an unrecorded, localized skirmish that happened in the aftermath of the violent events at Shechem earlier in his life. Alternatively, and perhaps more likely given the context, he is speaking in what we call the prophetic perfect tense.
The prophetic perfect tense.
Right. He is so absolutely certain that his descendants will conquer this land that he speaks of it as an already accomplished fact, attributing their future military victory to his current covenant promise.
The geography of this extra portion is incredibly significant, isn't it?
It is the linchpin of the narrative. The notes strongly identify this extra mountain slope as the region of Shechem.
The history of Shechem comes full circle in such a profound way for Joseph.
Hundreds of years after this conversation in Egypt, when the descendants of these two boys finally leave Egypt and secure the Promised Land, they bring Joseph's embalmed bones with them, and the exact place they choose to bury him is Shechem.
The very piece of land his father gave to him on a deathbed in a foreign country becomes his permanent resting place in the land of promise.
The continuity of that promise is chilling in the best way possible. Words spoken by a blind, dying man in a bedroom become the literal bedrock of a nation centuries later.
It proves that these blessings were not just empty, sentimental wishes. They were the architectural blueprints for reality.
I love that way of putting it.
So what does this all mean? For you, the listener, navigating your own life today. We aren't ancient patriarchs dividing up tribal territories, but the human behaviors we see in this room in Genesis 48 are incredibly modern. Think deeply about Joseph in this narrative.
He had everything arranged perfectly.
Exactly. He brought his sons, he understood the rules of his culture, he did the math, and he put the oldest on the right and the youngest on the left. He managed the situation flawlessly. How often do you do exactly that?
More often than we'd like to admit.
You try to perfectly arrange your life, your career trajectory, the expectations for your family. You put everything in what you believe is the logical right order.
We constantly build these rigid frameworks, convinced we know exactly how the blessing or the success is supposed to arrive.
And then how often do your perfectly laid plans get completely crossed by a different, ultimately greater design? We get frustrated, just like Joseph. We want to reach out and grab the hand of God or the hand of fate and force it back into the position we prepared for it. No, it's supposed to go like this.
But this ancient text invites you to consider that when your plans are crossed, it might not be a catastrophic error.
No.
It might be a deliberate, masterful blessing taking a form you simply didn't anticipate.
That is a powerful paradigm shift.
It really is. And it leads me to a final, entirely different thought I want to leave you with today. We've talked a lot about the men orchestrating this moment, Jacob and Joseph. But think about the two boys kneeling in front of the bed, Ephraim and Manasseh.
The ones receiving the blessing.
Right. These were young men born into Egyptian royalty. They grew up in the highest echelons of a pagan empire, likely speaking Egyptian, wearing Egyptian clothes, fully integrated into the culture of the most powerful nation on earth.
They were the grandsons of the man who saved the world from famine. They had it made.
Exactly. And in a single afternoon, in a dying man's bedroom, they are legally adopted into a nomadic Hebrew family. But more than that, because their uncles Reuben and Simeon failed so spectacularly, the heavy, crushing mantle of spiritual leadership for the entire covenant is suddenly dropped squarely onto their young shoulders.
The crossed hands didn't just give Ephraim a blessing.
No, it gave him an immense, terrifying burden.
A destiny he never asked for.
So the question to ponder as you go about your week is this. When you are suddenly thrust into a position of leadership or responsibility that you didn't plan for, perhaps because someone else before you dropped the ball, or because the hands of fate crossed unexpectedly, how do you carry the weight of a destiny you didn't choose?
Wow.
Ephraim had to figure out how to be the patriarch of a Hebrew promise when all he had ever known was Egyptian privilege. What unexpected mantle are you being asked to carry right now, and how are you letting it shape you?
That is a brilliant and heavy thought to carry with us, a completely different angle on the blessing. We want to thank you so deeply for joining us on this deep dive into Genesis 48. We absolutely loved unpacking these ancient notes with you.
It has been an immensely rewarding conversation. Thank you for your time, and God blesses all the listeners.
Yes, a final goodbye, and may God truly bless all of the listeners tuning in today. We will catch you on the next deep dive. God blesses all the listeners.